Hello, Stan State. Welcome to the Taking Care of You podcast. My name is Julia Rosas-Nieto, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Staffero, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker. We are both counselors that work at Counseling and Psychological Services on campus, also known as CAPS.
Welcome to our first episode on our self-compassion series, where we will explore and discuss self-compassion practices. Research indicates that people who are more self-compassionate tend to experience lower levels of depression, anxiety, stress, and shame. Similarly, research is also showing that more compassionate people experience higher levels of happiness, life satisfaction, self-confidence, and physical health.
Now let's get started.
You're listening to the Taking Care of You podcast.
Our hopes for this podcast are to bring awareness of the practices of self-compassion. For this episode, we will focus on introductions and reviewing the main components of self-compassion. Before we get into the juicy parts of self-compassion, we did want to get started with the following quote. It's like a mother when the baby is crying. She picks up the baby and she holds the baby tenderly in her arms. Your pain, your anxiety is your baby. You have to take care of it. You have to go back to yourself to recognize the suffering in you, embrace the suffering, and you get a relief. By Thich Nhat Hanh.
Wow, so powerful. We also wanted, we have a special guest here with us today, and we wanted to have her introduce herself and tell us a little bit about you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sandra Ruiz, and I'm an admin support assistant at CAPS. I'm a first-gen graduate. I graduated from CSU Stan with a BA in psychology back in 2011. And I'm very happy to be here with Julia and Jen on doing this something new for our department. So super excited.
Yes, thank you, Sandra, for joining us today.
We're so excited to have you. And Sandra is one of the first people that you will meet when you come visit us at CAPS. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And so we wanted to also talk about why we are here and why we are excited about self-compassion. And I know when I first started working at CAPS, I just noticed so many people that were coming in were dealing with that inner critic and people just being so kind of mean to themselves, with their own thoughts. And, I've struggled with that myself. And then I know when Julia and I would talk about it, we're like, yes, we need to build this up with the people that we see. And so that's why we were so excited about this.
Yes, just like Jen mentioned, we are both extremely excited, and Sandra mentioned it too, that this is something new, so everyone in our department is super excited for this, but we definitely noticed that there's this pattern in our department of that inner critic and those inner critical thoughts, such as, oh, I'm a failure, I should have done better, why did I say that, or I should have changed the way I said things, can be very, very tough on us. So we noticed that that's a pattern, but another pattern that we noticed was that self-compassionate was actually helping, the students that we see. So we wanted to share the benefits of self-compassion to those that, we were not just seeing in our office, but others that, we're not ready maybe to make the first step in therapy.
Yes, because then they can just listen and kind of do some of the practices that we're going to be doing in the podcast. Definitely.
So now that we got a chance to talk about our great excitement and why we are here, right? We answered that question. We wanted to let you know a little bit about self-compassion. So in other words, the 411 on self-compassion. And I wanted to start by just explaining a little bit about the three main elements of self-compassion. Those main elements are mindfulness, common humanity, and self-compassion. Mindfulness is being in the present moment with our feelings. Instead of putting them in the back of our minds or, putting it underneath, the rug, we actually identify that those feelings are there and we validate those feelings. Even if it's just saying, oh, this is sadness, but it's a really difficult feeling to experience, that by itself is already practicing mindfulness. We also have common humanity, and it's just a reminder that we are not alone. Being aware that we are all non-perfect humans who experience similar feelings. And then last but not least, we of course have self-kindness, which is taking care of ourselves with a friendly and supportive attitude, rather than motivating ourselves with tough love. And that's where those inner critical thoughts come back again, because a lot of us believe that, oh, if I treat myself with that tough love, I'm going to motivate myself, right? Oh, you should have pushed harder. Oh, you should have changed the way you said things. Oh, they're never going to like me. We think that those thoughts are actually going to motivate us to do better. But the reality is that research and data out there is saying that if we motivate ourselves in a supportive and encouraging and friendly way, we're actually going to meet those goals a lot faster than if we motivate ourselves with tough love.
Yeah, tough love can kind of even make you give up and be like, oh, like I don't want to even try. And like if you get like a bad grade on an exam and it's like, oh, I'm so stupid. I'm never going to, finish school. I know some people will be like, they'll spiral and it'll be like, and I'm going to be homeless on the street and, not be able to work because I failed that one exam. But, you're just not there yet with getting the grade you want. And you just have to think about, how you're going to, but motivating yourself with the self-compassion instead of that tough love, which doesn't really work.
Right. And Jen, you actually reminded me that a lot of people confuse self-compassion with self-esteem.
Yes.
Right? And although self-esteem is amazing and it's great, of course, but we do have to differentiate both. And the best way that I explain it to, to the people that I see or to friends or coworkers is that with self-esteem, it's based on actions, right? Mm-hmm. So when we see a student and they tell us, oh, I failed the test, that self-esteem is definitely going to lower. Mm-hmm. And if you pass that test, your self-esteem is going to be high up. But with self-compassion, it shouldn't be so up and down. It should be consistent because we do want to treat ourselves in a friendly and supportive manner. And that by itself, hopefully, feels encouraging and motivating.
And just like that, the quote that you shared, where the baby is your anxiety and your pain and you have to take care of it. And it's like, yes, we have to take care of those painful moments in a kind way that's mm-hmm. so much helpful. And we have seen that really be helpful with people and ourselves too.
Yes.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about the yin versus yang part of self-compassion, which is Kristin Neff is who we get our information from. She's written the books on self-compassion, and she's written one recently called Fierce Self-Compassion. But so as Julia explained, tender self-compassion involves being with ourselves in an accepting way, like comforting ourselves, reassuring ourselves that we aren't alone, and being mindful of our pain and feeling it, Fierce self-compassion involves acting in the world to alleviate suffering. It tends to involve protecting, providing for, and motivating ourselves, which can be really hard sometimes, right? Sometimes we need to set boundaries. We need to say no. We need to fight for injustices. It could also be giving ourselves permission to do the things that make us happy rather than focusing on what makes others happy, which I think a lot of us maybe struggle with that too. It's like, what does, everybody else want? But what about you? What do you want? Mm-hmm. So there is like a resource if you wanted to check it out. So on the Kristin Neff has a website called selfcompassion.org. And if you go under their research tab and then you go under instruments for research, there's a self-compassion scale and it's a short form. So you can kind of take that exam and see kind of how how much you need to work on self-compassion. Like you can see what your score is. We do that sometimes in our group that Julia and I do. And it's kind of eye-opening to I've even had some people say, I don't need to work on self-compassion. Like I'm pretty self-compassionate. And then when they take the quiz, they're like, whoa, like that score does not reflect what I was thinking. Oh, and then here's a great example. of fierce self-compassion. So Jack Kirby is one of the Marvel Comics writers, and he was astounded after witnessing a car accident and seeing a mother lift a 3,000-pound car to save her child trapped underneath. That moved him to create the Incredible Hulk. This fierce aspect of us is a superpower. We can use this fierceness to protect our children, but also to protect ourselves, meet our needs, motivate change, and fight for injustice.
Yes, and I always say, if you're a visual learner like myself, Jen did an amazing job at explaining the soothing self-compassion versus the fierce self-compassion, and how we need to have a balance of both. We can't just be one or the other, because then we're not balanced out, right? If we're all soothing, then we might not have the motivation to actually accomplish some of our goals. But if we are totally fierce or completely fierce, then we can look as pretty aggressive. So we want to have definitely a balance between both. And I'm a visual learner, so for those of you that have that visual, abilities, the best way that I could explain it, or that I have learned through Kristen Neff, such as Jennifer mentioned before, and the books that we have read from Kristen Neff, is that, that the soothing self-compassion best reflects a soothing mom. So if we have a child, if we could imagine a child that, falls and then gets an owie, we can definitely imagine, that soothing mom trying to comfort, trying to validate, trying to offer, nonverbal language, such as the hug and the high fives and the pat in the back, the encouraging messages of you're going to be okay, good job, you're brave. And then the other example, or, focusing a little bit about the fear self-compassion, is still focusing on, that mom or that dad, but instead seeing that mama or papa bear, when that child needs some kind of advocacy or it's in danger, we can definitely see that image of a mom or of a dad, fiercely trying to protect their child. So these are just two great visual examples that can help to remember, the yin and the yang, or the soothing versus the fierce self-compassion.
Yes, good example. So we hope this information has been helpful, but we wanted to not only give information on self-compassion and the benefits and the fierce self-compassion, but we also wanted you to get some practices so that you can do some of these practices and, build that muscle. So if you think about, how we think negatively, right? Like a lot of us have been thinking negatively since we were little, right? Sometimes our parents put those things, those negative things in our head, or bullies, or right, people at school. So we want to build that muscle of the self-compassion, because if you practice, it will be easier to just switch to being more self-compassionate than being so critical. So if you'd like to participate in this activity, you will need a piece of paper, a pencil or pen. Also, you could take maybe notes. You could use your phone if you wanted to do it that way. I just wanted to say a little disclaimer. We wanted to remind everyone that sometimes mindfulness and deep breathing can be triggering. So please stop if anything doesn't work for you or your body. And it can be really eye-opening, this exercise, to consider the degree to which you display compassion with your friends compared to yourself. So this is why we do this activity, because it is really typically eye-opening for us. So let's begin. Close your eyes. If you feel comfortable, get in a comfortable position. Reflect for a moment about various times when you had a close friend who was suffering in some way. Consider different types of situations. Perhaps she was feeling bad about herself for a mistake she made, or was being mistreated, or was exhausted by caring for her kids, or was afraid of a challenging task. Think about some different situations that your friends have come to you with, and ask yourself, how do you typically respond to your friends in these types of situations? What do you say? What tone do you use? How is your posture? What nonverbal gestures do you use? Now take a moment to write down what you discovered. And I'll repeat them. How do you typically respond to your friends? What do you say to them? The tone of voice you use, and your posture, as well as your nonverbal gestures. Okay. Now we'll move on to the next question. How do you typically respond to yourself in similar situations? When you've had, made a mistake or been mistreated, what do you say to yourself? What tone do you use? How is your posture? What non-verbal gestures do you use? Write down what you discovered. What are the things you tell yourself when you've made a mistake or something didn't go as planned? Okay. Now, do you notice any patterns or difference in how you respond to your friends versus yourself? For instance, maybe you catastrophize with yourself, but have more perspective with friends. Write down what the patterns you noticed with how you treat your friends as opposed to how you treat yourself. The last question is, what do you think it would be like if you started to treat yourself more like you treat your friends? What impact could it have on your life? Right. Perfect. And so now I would like to ask our guest some questions about, thank you for practicing self-compassion with us.
And every time I practice it, something different comes up.
Yes. And that's like what we talk about with our group, because like you can do the same practice and you're still going to get something out of it.
Yes.
And it'll be different.
Different.
Yes.
And I think it also depends on the situations that you're going through, right? Like if there's, because like life happens. So every situation is different. And when you apply the self-compassion, it's like something different comes up.
So true. So true.
Yeah. So for me personally, what came up is that I do treat my friends differently. Like when it comes to being self-compassionate, with them, I tend to hug them, and I'm very like touchy. I either I kind of rub their the side of their arms, or I hug them until they feel better. Or like I tell them like, oh, it's okay, friend, like it's gonna be okay. But versus myself, I'm like, and I don't know if we have Spanish speakers out there, but like the first thing that comes into my mind, and I know Julia's like, don't talk to yourself so bad. I'm like, ay, estúpida.
That is true.
Which in English is stupid. But yeah, like I tell myself those things, and I think one of the things that I was talking to one of my other friends was, because he said that I said that like, ay, Sandra, que estúpida. And so he's like, no, like, don't tell yourself so bad. Like, don't call yourself so bad, And one of the things that I also learned is that the way that you talk to yourself is kind of like the way that you tolerate other people to call you.
Yes,
so
Sandra.
If you talk to yourself that way, then you allow other people to call you the same things, and it's gonna be like, oh, that's normal. That's a normal thing.
Because you're used to it.
Because you're used to it. And that was such an eye-opener for me. And it just recently happened. Like, I was like, that is so true. If I talk to myself that way, then I am allowing other people to call me that way too.
Yes.
And so that was for me an eye-opener. I was like, nope. So now every time I catch myself, I'm like, no, Sandra, you're not an estúpida. You're not that.
I love that, because like this practice is super powerful, and it can be so quick where you can, just like you said, you can catch yourself when you're being mean to yourself and be like, no, Sandra, how would I talk to my friends? Yes. What would I say to them?
Yes.
I love that.
Yes. And especially, would your friend be telling you that? Like, would you allow your friend to call you those names?
They shouldn't be friends.
They shouldn't be friends.
No way.
Then you should be doubting your friendships.
Yes. What did you notice any? So you did have differences.
Yes, definitely differences.
So Sandra, what do you think, because there's a difference between the way you treat yourself and the way you treat your friends, what impact could it have on your life?
Well, one of the things that I usually do when I'm feeling like really sad or really crappy about a decision or a mistake that I made, I go shopping to make myself feel better. But that's just like a short-term solution to whatever feeling, you're going through. And, the downside of doing a lot of shopping is that now it affects your financial. So now you're not only worrying about, not feeling bad about whatever mistake you did or whatever, bad, because I really don't want to say bad, because nothing is, bad.
Right.
It's just like, it affects you. Like, if it's a short solution to feel good about yourself or whatever is that's going on, it affects, the long term. What I've usually been doing now is I process the emotion. And I think that's one of the things that, it's really hard for us people, that don't know about self-compassion. Like, they don't know how to process and validate those feelings. So in order for them to, I'm talking about me, like, in order for me to feel good, I find something else that is going to make me feel good. But in reality, it's not a long-term solution.
Right. And Sandra, I'm really glad that you brought retail therapy up because I think I'm at fault for that too. I think a lot of us out there probably go to this as a short-term solution, right? And you're right. Then our inner critic says, oh, well, you're a bad mom or you're a bad person because now you're getting into debt. But then we do it again because we feel bad and we get into more debt. And we can see that it's just a spiral down method or a cycle that we can't get out of. It feels like we can't break it.
Exactly.
Because it brings a lot of good feelings when we do that retail therapy.
Yes.
Right. But processing the emotion, kind of, you work through it, you feel it, you validate it, and you can move forward. And then you don't have to do the not the best coping skill, right?
Exactly.
You can,
exactly.
Yes, I love that.
And I think it's really hard especially for myself, because I didn't know of self-compassion. I think I started learning about self-compassion once I started in CAPS. And in my mind, it would be like self-compassion. Like, how is that going to help you? How are you being nice to yourself?
Yes. No, it's so basic and it seems kind of like what?
Yeah.
How is that going to be helpful?
But it works. And I think as I've been working with you guys, I feel like I've been less hard on myself. And not only that, but I think I've gone to, I've been able to process the emotion, because usually when we don't know how to validate that emotion, we ignore it. We ignore it and we put it, we place it somewhere like really close down in our body or in our brain where we do not want to know about it. We disregard it, but it builds up.
Yes.
It builds up.
I feel like it's a sneak attack. That's what I tell my people that I work with. I'm like, it's the sneak attack. It comes to get you later.
Yes.
It's always at like a bad time, right? Where
exactly.
And then they build up if there's lots of them and they're stacking up. And
Yes. And I think that's how also depression kind of sneaks up. It kind of starts. I remember one time when I was feeling good, and I think I was telling you, Julia, I was feeling good, and all of a sudden, this feeling sneaked up, and I'm like, oh, what is going on? Why am I feeling like this? And it's an emotion that I hadn't processed. So then I was like, Julia, let me talk to you about it, and we did. But it was like, wow, it's all of a sudden, you could be doing so good, and then all of a sudden this feeling just pops up.
Right.
I'm a visual learner, so the example that I like to give to others is that if we imagine that we have a bottle of water or a cup of water or a cup of coffee, right, and it's not completely full, it has maybe 1/4 or 3/4 of, liquid in there. That liquid is actually our emotions, all of them: anger, sadness, loneliness, maybe depression, maybe a little bit of anxiety. All of it, it's going to collect. And if we don't slowly take it out, guess what? You're still going to be pouring more liquids into it. And what happens when there's no more space, but you still have feelings? When, it's all the way up, but these feelings are still coming in, it overflows, right? And that's what I like to explain as that's when we fall apart, we lash out on others, or we have these crying spells where we're like, I don't even know why I'm crying. I'm just crying.
Yes.
And that's why I feel like, our bodies can only handle so much. And we need to realize that we are humans. We're not perfect humans. We're not machines. And we need to make sure that we do take care of our bodies. We take care of our heart. We take care of our mind, not just our bodies physically and nutritionally, right? We have to have a balance between all of those 3 areas, which will help us take out some of the liquid from that cup. Having more space for when something happens in the future and you have more feelings, then you have a little bit more space to put those feelings in.
Yes. Yeah. And you know what? You just reminded me of something that I am. And I think, I usually tell my friends, I'm an overthinker. And I think self-compassion comes really it has helped a lot when it comes to myself when I am overthinking, because I think of everything, and it's not just scenarios that can happen. It's just negative overthinking. You dwell on sometimes the mistakes that you made, and you start calling yourself all those names. But then with self-compassion, you put a stop to it. Like you kind of catch yourself and say, no, we are all human. We make mistakes. No one is perfect. Yeah. And I think this is why now I feel like self-compassion is so important versus when I started. And also because, I was raised, Mexican. So it was tough love. Like, you don't know something, you find a solution and you figure it out. My parents were the last resource. So I had to find a solution for whatever situation that I was in. But during that time, I felt like there was no like encouragement words. Like, no, you got this, Sandra. If you need anything, we are here, but you need to find, by yourself. And I think when I would make when I would make a mistake, like my parents would be like, what were you thinking? And it wasn't like, what were you thinking? Right. No, it was like, what were you thinking? Like in a mad tone of voice. And, no, yeah, it's true. I am a super child, like you go into that mode like, my parents are
absorb it. You start to believe it. Yes. And if you get that happening, often, like it starts to become like a core belief.
Not only that, but then the shoulds. Because you should have done this and you should have done that. And it's like...
Right. I'm glad you mentioned that up because sometimes it does bring culture into it. And I know it's not just the Hispanic culture, but I am Hispanic. I know Sandra's Hispanic as well. And Jennifer too. So we could give a lot of examples from our culture, but I have heard that it could be similar in other cultures. The tissing, the toughening up. If somebody looks weak, then, parents automatically, since you're a kid, they use these methods to make you a little bit harder, right? How many times were we jumping on something that we weren't as a child, and your parent maybe give you a warning the first time, but then you fall or you cut yourself or you scratch yourself, and your parents say, there you go, por mensa,
Yes, or even harsher words, and it's like, oh, I am that. But then, and that's where it comes, like a loved one is telling you that, so now you accept it from everybody. So then you go into these relationships and then you accept it from your partner. So you think that it's okay. But no, friends, it's not.
But it just like goes to show like how much self-compassion can really help develop so many different aspects of our lives. And I love how it helps us like embrace our imperfections, because nobody's perfect. We all have imperfections, and to kind of just nurture them and care for them and be like, yeah, that's part of me.
Yeah.
I love it.
Oh. And then for people to accept you the way that you are, like, yes, with imperfections and everything.
Yes.
And I mean, if they don't tolerate you or they don't accept you the way, then it's time to think, do I really want this friendship or do I really want this relationship?
Right. Reevaluate it. Yeah.
Right. It's a red flag or a sign that lets you know, hey, is this healthy for me?
Yes.
Yeah, it is a whole process, though, of a self-compassion journey, kind of like,
it is,
because then you're being more compassionate to yourself. But then you, like you said, you notice like partners or friends that aren't having that same, they're not making you feel good about yourself. So, yeah.
And I think one of the things that in order to be self-compassionate or to help you in this journey of being self-compassionate is having people that support you, people that are also self-compassionate towards you, because you can be self-compassionate towards yourself, but sometimes the environment that you're in is also critical, because if you're hearing those words, negative comments from people that you love, then it's a little bit tougher, your self-compassion journey.
It's hard.
Right. Well, I think we are getting close to the end. We wanted to thank Sandra for participating on this self-compassion journey with us and the audience and everybody out there. We hope that it was a great experience for you. And we would like to close with a poem for every podcast at the end. But remember to stay kind to yourself. The parts you struggle with are the parts of you that need the most love. The parts that feel so lost are the parts of you that need the most kindness. The parts that trouble you are the parts of you that make you the most brave. By Courtney Peppernell.
Thank you so much for listening. This podcast is for informational purposes and does not substitute for mental health care from a licensed professional. If you are in need of more support and are enrolled at Stan State, contact CAPS at 209-667-3381. You can also follow us on Instagram at Stan State CAPS to see our upcoming groups and workshops. You can find this podcast and other Stan State podcasts online at csustan.edu/podcasts. You can also listen and download past episodes on your favorite podcasting platform. So be sure to follow and subscribe for the new episode alerts.